Welcome
Welcome.
to the Spiritual Revolution podcast.
Episode
Episode two.
2. Yeah.
Yes, two.
Yes.
I just think of like Hot Shots Part 2.
Part 2?
Yeah, did you ever see that?
No.
Those like Charlie Sheen Rambo movies.
No, I have no idea.
Oh, they're so fucking good.
After my time, I guess, or before my time?
Before your time. Yeah. You think I'm old?
No.
Robbing the cradle.
There's just a little bit of an age gap, that's all.
I always think of Billy Idol. Anyway, go ahead. What are we talking about today?
Wow. Getting in deep already.
I know.
Should we redo that?
Oh, no, that was a Cradle of Love. That's what that is. That's what I think of him. Okay. Cool. Oh, the Cradle of Love. It's a Cradle of Love. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
All right. Okay, so you mention in the book pretty early in the Dear Readers, and then again, you reiterate it in the welcome, which is that I have found the beauty of life through connection and service. What do you mean by that?
Well, shit. Service has been what allows me to connect in a way that allows me to see beauty and recognize beauty in life. Because beauty in life for me is a couple things. One, it's about absolute presence, and it's also about not being clouded or filtered by self, which is what we talked about last time, right? So if I'm connecting to people through service, like just trying to be the blessing, I don't have any expectation of reciprocation. I just want to love on you because you're you, you know? You're a being. You're an expression of the universe to me. Then you don't have any power over me, you know what I mean? Because I'm more aligned with like living in principle and purpose than trying to get something out of you.
Okay, so you're saying that when the orientation of being around people is looking for something to get from them, that places us in a position to be disappointed.
What's been your experience with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think in the times in which I have attempted to or wanted something out of someone, specifically, whether it was something as, let's say, validation, for example.
Wielding power.
Right. False power.
Totally.
Right. Why it's false power is because it doesn't connect me to the moment. I don't actually feel empowered by that. In fact, I feel disempowered by it.
Well, it's the state of disempowerment that's driving you to do that anyway.
Totally.
Right?
If we are seeking validation from someone, but I'm putting on a front in order to get that validation, then even if I receive that validation, there's a part of me that feels fraudulent in that exchange.
Totally.
Because of the fact that I presented in a fraudulent way in order to attain whatever that validation was. But also, it's very fleeting.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, that's why validation seeking usually shows up in so many different forms, because you can't isolate it into just one experience, one relationship, one photo, one like. It's this indiscriminate overall, I want you to see me as what I am reflecting to you.
Totally. And even like how validation is expressed to you can be unsatisfying.
Totally.
Like it's never enough.
Yeah, or you don't believe them, like, hey, you didn't say this the right way, so.
Totally.
The exact combination of words that'll make me believe that you actually mean it.
Yeah, 100%.
And if I'm not in a place where I feel secure within myself, then it's being or attempting to get through that filter of self. And if I think I'm unworthy or not good enough in some form or another, that compliment can't even get past that.
Totally. And that's where, like, you know, people talk about self-empowerment or, you know, I can't love anybody else until I love myself, like this whole idea. And I feel like that's really backwards. You know, it's almost like I get more power through selflessness. I actually have the ability to love myself through loving others, because what I wind up seeing is I wind up seeing me and you and me. Like there's no longer that divide anymore when I'm just trying to be helpful, you know, be kind, be loving. And all those things that I identify with as a self that separates me from you is like really part of the problem.
Totally. And we could use other words, right? Self as ego. We could debate whether or not an ego is even real. And even based on what you've said, within the thought patterns, that's really where self exists. And if I'm constantly crafting this image of self, of what I want to see, because I think that's what I'll be validated for, what I'll be loved for, but deep down I know that that's not actually what I really am.
Right.
It isolates me further and it only becomes less satisfying. And yet I continue to go to that empty well looking for that same.
Ego gets a bad rap.
Yeah, it does.
You know what I mean? And is it
Sure.
Can we avoid it?
I mean, is it real?
I mean, I don't know.
Never seen one.
This is very true.
That's from some spiritual teacher. I don't know the name, but yeah. Have you ever seen an ego?
Yeah, totally. 100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But somehow we all have some level of understanding of what that might be. Right?
Totally.
And it doesn't seem to be a problem, right? So even if it doesn't seem to be a problem for certain people.
Yeah. I wonder what that is.
Well, if it just is the thing that gets you to know, the learning piece that gets you to know, okay, you put the keys in the car and you drive the car and you brush your teeth in the morning. And if it's just those simple tasks, then...
Sound reasoning.
Well, you could say the same thing about the body, right? Like the body allows us to hug one another. The body allows us to communicate right now in this moment, which is pretty cool. Consciousness having a conversation with itself is a beautiful thing.
Totally.
Yeah. But I think that there's limits to its effectiveness or even the necessity for it in our lives, right? Which is a deeply intimate practice, which is what the selfless practice has revealed to me.
Tell me about it.
About selflessness?
For you.
Well, I think first we should define it. I don't think we really did fully in the last episode. And I guess it's something that will evolve over time as we discuss it. But I think that selfless practice specifically is something which you've defined as doing something without any...
Expectation, reciprocation.
Right.
There you go, baby.
So,
Yeah.
no expectation of reciprocation.
None.
Which means I can open the door. There doesn't need to be a thank you, right? Or when I'm looking at our orange tree in the backyard and I'm just staring at it deeply, like there's no need for any reciprocation. I don't need the orange tree to respond back, right? And if I tell the orange tree it's beautiful, I'm just saying it because it's a natural iteration of that. It's spontaneous, right? It's not me crafting this message and hoping I'm going to get something from the orange tree if I tell it that it's beautiful.
Totally. And even like the expectation, like let's say I'm walking down the street and I smile at someone, they don't smile back. Me even thinking that it's about me is crazy. 'Cause
Okay.
who knows what's going on in their day? Who knows how they're perceiving me? I'm like walking down the street with a bunch of tattoos and look weird and maybe intimidating to some people. You know, there could be all kinds of thoughts going on in their head that, you know, makes them not want to say hi to me. But does that stop me from doing that practice? You know, because that actually feels better for me.
Sure.
You know, because what I've also found is that in that selfless practice and finding the commonality from my end, you know what I mean, seeing it in other people, and especially in like these discussions with people over the book, I've actually gotten to be able to like forgive myself for things that I thought were unique struggles to me, because I've had a bunch of different conversations. And what I found is that every human being is on the spectrum of struggling with the same stuff, you know? And so we're not that unique. We're not any more damaged than each other. You know, it just manifests itself in different ways, maybe at higher levels in one person and the other. But in terms of capacity of feelings, capacity for behaviors, capacity of thoughts, it's all pretty much the same, you know? The person who thinks about murdering someone is one thing, but, you know, I've definitely had rageful thoughts in my mind at some point. You know, we all kind of exist in these spaces that are actually truly similar.
Right. Okay. So you're bringing up just the fact that it's a spectrum,
Totally.
right? That there's a variance,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
But essentially, we're all drawing from the same ideas.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we start talking about that mental health industry? Should we start talking about these diagnoses out there in the world? I know.
Going into
I
insurance and all
know.
that.
It's so crazy right now. But that's the thing. It's like when I thought I had ADHD and I was diagnosed with that, I thought, well, shit, you're never going to be able to meditate. You're never going to be able to sit still. You're never going to be able to focus on one thing. Or if you did, you'd only focus on that one thing and block everything out. You would never have like a full perspective of what's happening on around you, right? Depression, I was never going to get out of that. I was always going to live with this low grade malaise, or, this propensity when things got bad to think, I don't want to be on this earth anymore, And because of those diagnoses that I received, I felt really pigeonholed and almost limited to, that's my existence on this earth. Like there's no way out of that. And I think actually a lot of that stuff's like pretty harmful. And I'm not even talking about medications or anything like that. I'm just literally talking about the ideology of saying you are this, you are borderline, you are bipolar, and then walking around this
And
earth.
that's all you are.
Yeah, totally. Like this badge of damage that we're walking around with, which is just crazy. Like, where's the hope in that?
Sure. Well, to your point, right, about identification, right? When we're overly identified with anything, that can be an issue.
Yeah.
It can put us in a place of volatility or limit our ability to know. I guess, does it limit our ability or does it just limit our understanding of what life could be?
Well, maybe a little bit of both.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's like important to be able to think outside the box and to really understand that, as human beings or just any being on this earth, we have more power available to us than people believe. And as soon as you start labeling it this thing, all of a sudden now I'm different. Now you don't understand me. Now I don't listen to you. I start shutting off people. I start, making excuses for my own ways of living and thinking that I can't get out of them because of this label that I've attached myself to. And all of a sudden I'm like in a prison that I've decided to hold on to. I'm not going to say that I constructed it because maybe I heard that from someone who is a professional, right?
Sure.
But the truth is that at some point it's my choice. It's my choice to believe that or not.
Well, yeah, and I think the part of being different, right? Like, there's nothing wrong with being different.
No.
You're speaking specifically about this coming from a place of a deflated sense of self.
Limiting beliefs.
Right.
That's what I'm talking about.
Rather than celebrating a difference or celebrating an experience that's perhaps unique. It's not that. It's coming from the losing sight of what is currently happening because we are stuck in some idea of ourselves that perhaps we've outgrown.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, there were times in my life where I could flip open that DSM-5 and literally relate to anything that I saw in there. I was like literally a piece of every single diagnosis. And I was like wow.
A zodiac sign, or you're just like, wait, maybe I'm a Taurus, maybe I'm an Aries, maybe I'm a Gemini. I don't know. I'm feeling very Libra today. Yeah, totally.
Totally. Yeah, I'm a super sociopath today.
Yeah, totally. 100%. Oh, okay. Yeah. I asked one of my buddies about it, who's a clinician, has been working in social work for many years. And I said, hey, is there anything that in the DSM or any text that you know of that gives us an idea of what we're aiming for?
Right?
Yeah.
What the fuck
she
is
laughed.
normal, dude? Right?
Yeah,
It's
she
crazy.
laughed very hard. And she was like, all right, so we're saying someone who hasn't had any attachment issues was given the exact amount of love and care that they needed as a child and throughout their life. No trauma, nothing. And like we just started, the conversation completely devolved because there isn't anything that says, hey, this is the thing that you should be aiming for. Here is the pinnacle of mental health.
Totally.
I think the closest that we can get to is happiness, right?
Yes.
Which is deeply personal and intimate, which I think is so huge about the book is there's so many questions in it. Rather, there are statements, but there's a lot of questions. And even in those statements, you can turn them into questions because this is a process of people finding out for themselves, first off, how they want to feel, and at least have some goal or aim that they want for themselves, whatever they want to call it, whatever they want out of life, but they're allowed to choose. I don't think anyone's ever told me until, doing this process, like, hey, you can choose how you want to feel, where you want to aim toward that.
Right.
Yeah. And obviously we'll get into pause and things of that nature, the idea of choice. But even just having someone say, hey, how do you want to feel?
Yeah. Well, I think it's like a really important question.
Sure. I've been asked, how do you feel many
Totally.
times, right? And I think even the searching of that labeling can be difficult or challenging. And even then, what feels like guilt to me, which you and I talked about one time where I was irritated about
You?
something. Yeah.
Never.
I mean, not often, but
Of
yeah,
course
it
not.
does happen.
She's fiery.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't think passions, but see, even with that, right? To me, fiery is not
Passion. That's
not
what it is. Yeah,
irritating,
Totally.
right? It's not irritability, but our understanding of that is different, right? So the same way that our understanding of guilt is different. Like to me, irritation is guilt. That's what someone else would ascribe it to or label it. So I think even in that we're limited. Language is incredibly limited.
Right.
So the value of asking a question and allowing people to explore within themselves, which allows them to customize this process for themselves.
Totally. With each person they read
With
it.
each person, right?
Yeah. So that's the other thing. And we talked about this earlier where it's like, this thing is not a cult. It's not like a religion. There's no specific doctrine. There is no leader. And like what you're saying, it's really just about having a conversation about the words in this book and really just asking yourself and the person across from you what they mean to you and having a discussion over it.
Totally.
You know?
Them discovering their own autonomy.
Totally.
Right? Based on how they want to feel.
Right.
Yeah.
It's about personal power.
Totally.
Tapping into that.
And you explicitly state in the book that there's no gurus in the process.
Thank God. Seriously, fuck a guru. Fuck them. You know what I mean? If anyone literally like puts themselves in a position where you become dependent upon them, literally run from that person. That's like the wrong person.
Yeah, totally. Especially because I think the unquestioning following of any human being, when it's the human experience is deeply subjective.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
No singular person has the answer to everything.
Totally.
Yeah. And like you're saying, it is personal. So there is an individuality to it, right?
Right.
Yeah, totally.
That's what I mean. So there are differences in the sense of there are the fact that we are here in these bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have differences in our bodies, right? We're able to interact with these bodies.
You have such a beautiful body.
What are you doing? We were talking about the body differences, celebrating differences.
Yes.
Yeah, and allowing, I think what it is that asking questions also mitigates that desire for authority, because it does seem like people seek authority.
Totally.
Yeah, where they want to be told what to do, when really this process is about people finding out their truth,
Right.
their own authority within themselves, not external authority.
Totally.
Yeah.
And really asking to themselves like what these concepts mean to them. And also understanding that no matter who you're reading this book with, there's like no hierarchy. I mean, the point is to connect on equal ground.
Totally. Right.
Yeah.
No matter who is sitting across from you.
Totally.
Yeah. And fostering that connection, because connection is about equality. Can you really have a connection without equality?
Right.
I think that inequality is what disconnects us.
Yeah.
From a micro level to a macro level.
Totally. And, my experience in selfless practice is that I've sat across from people from all kinds of different socioeconomic class, all kinds of different religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, everything. And what's interesting is that when I'm sitting across from somebody, just engaging and connecting them in an intimate and authentic conversation, I truly get to see the oneness of them all, which brings me to mushrooms. It's like all these people out here trying to have these like spiritual experiences and like shift their entire perspective on the world, healing through these plant medicine things, right? And it's like, that's cool.
Plant medicine things.
Yeah, ceremony. Are we gonna talk about shaman, Chad? Anyway, the point is that like all that's fine and dandy, but there still needs to be an integration aspect of that process, right? So if you're dead set on doing that stuff, and I've spent a lot of time in hallucinogens back in the day, and the greatest download that I ever got from the universe is that we're all one, we're all connected, right? So cool. If you want to go and just trip and have that experience, sick. But if you want to actually live that experience and have that sustainable peace in your life that comes from that, it's just a selfless practice. It's just connecting to the moment in front of you, right?
Totally. And I think that that's true about anything. If we gain understanding, even of self, right? Of self-knowledge, what do I do with that? What do I do with that on its own, right? In fact, even just gaining self-knowledge either through a book, philosophy, perhaps with a therapist or another mental health professional, or even just through communication with a community that supports me and loves me, I might gain some intellectual understanding of why I do what I do and patterns and how I've been trapped in those patterns. But in terms of that actually creating a path for me to be freed from those patterns, self-knowledge alone won't do that.
Right. 100%.
In fact, it just added sometimes to further neurosis, additional neurosis, because it was like I would spot the pattern. I'm like, look, you're in the pattern again. And then I would do the pattern again. And
I can't stop.
Yeah. And
what's the matter with me?
Filled with guilt and shame about how I can't get out of that same pattern. But now I can't even enjoy the pattern because I know that it's happening.
Totally.
And then that feels like its own weird sort of predestined fate. To your point, if I then add a diagnosis to that, I'm like, well, see, you're broken for life.
It's my bloodline, right? It's my generational
my
trauma.
Ancestors. Yeah, totally. Well, and I think that us understanding those things or having a sensitivity to that, right? But knowing that ultimately when you're faced with that, what do you really want?
Right.
You want to get free of it, right?
Totally.
You want to get healed. Thinking that it's going to be on the external world to heal that. Well, is the world ever going to be ready, sensitive enough, compassionate enough, kind enough for me to heal? I mean, potentially one day, right? But how does that help me today?
Totally. Well, and to me, in my mind, I think that the only way that we are going to get to that place is if people are actually practicing this consistently with each other. I mean, that's the spreading of the healing.
Totally. I mean, even when we see the ways in which those things manifest themselves in people's lives and how painful that is, because that's what makes it so serious, is because it's so deeply painful.
Totally.
And it can find itself in these different avenues that are really dangerous. And so it's to the point of, well, this is here now. So yeah, someone could do a case study on me and come up with different points, understanding whatever the problems are further or the patterns are further. Yet, how is that going to help my life?
Right.
And so the selfless action is what allowed me to get out of that, or at least have a reprieve from it. So even when I needed to look deeper into myself and see that pattern and undo painful experiences, like in terms of how they had affected my current belief system, right? And being able to interrogate that was all valuable, but only with the engine of selfless practice. Like growing those two together is what allowed me to, like I said, get a reprieve from it, but also utilize it in a way that was helpful to others, right? And ultimately helpful to myself.
Yeah, of course. And I don't want to take away like from self knowledge, because I think in the very beginning, self knowledge did seem exciting to me, and I did get some relief in the beginning. I just think that for the long term, it didn't age well, you know. And then it did turn on me, like what you're talking about, where it's like now I have all the self knowledge, patterns are still there. What's the matter with me? Why can't I change this? And the simplicity and practicality of a diligent practice, um, just was never presented to me until it was.
Totally.
And that was actually the healing factor. I mean, even the things that I guess people would consider deeply traumatic, it wound up healing that stuff too, because even because a lot of the trauma stuff happened to me, when I was 4, 17, teenage years, 20, whatever. But, now I'm a 46-year-old man. And so to still be walking around choosing to hold on to that stuff and bringing it into my current moments stopped being logical to me, because I'm not present. I'm not living in the moment, but I didn't know how to get to the moment, right? So what I found through this practice is that the best way to get to any moment is simply to have an intention for every moment. And if my intention is just to be the blessing to now, I'm here with you.
Right.
Now,
So
right?
when you say that it's a choice to hold on to it, what do you mean by that?
Well, what I found, so like, for instance, being molested when I was a kid, right? Now, I got something out of holding on to it, right?
In what sense?
Well, I got to basically tell myself that, this is why I'm sexually promiscuous. This is why I don't ever like become emotionally available to people that I'm seeing. This is why I don't trust men. This is why I don't trust women. And also, just if anyone ever confronted me on something that was actually trying to pull me up to get clarity on maybe where I was living in a way that was self-destructive, I would always have that card, but I was molested. You don't understand me, So I chose to hold on to those things to basically excuse behavior patterns that developed based on, maladaptive belief systems that, of course, were born from experience. But at some point, it's like, do I want to live in that prison or not,
So you're talking about weaponizing.
Totally.
Okay.
Yeah. Which I think happens with mental health all day today.
Was there any ways in which you were affected that were not opportune for weaponizing?
What do you mean?
Were there any thoughts or feelings that you had about yourself that were deeply painful because of what had happened, other than the weaponizing aspect of it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, initially, I felt ashamed about myself. I questioned whether or not it happened even because I blacked out. I questioned my sexuality, which I had judgment on that too. I questioned my masculinity in terms of not fighting back. Like, there was a lot of stuff that I questioned closer to the time that it happened, because it was a heightened situation,
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally.
Felt powerless.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in those aspects of it, so the places where there is choice in the sense of weaponizing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the place where there is no choice in the way in which it's affected you or affected you at that time, right? Like, I think that that's a really delicate and sensitive issue. And I think it is like sort of a fine line.
Totally.
Right? But you know the difference within yourself. But again, still had to do that inquiry to figure that out.
Yeah, of course.
Of like, okay, how am I truly affected and how am I weaponizing this to justify these other behaviors?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, do you think that the promiscuity had anything to do with that?
I do actually, because
Yeah, I guess that's my point is like, was there any truth to where you weaponized?
well, to be quite honest with you, I think the reason why I latched onto it is because I had a therapist tell me that, they
Oh.
almost like gave me that, oh, no wonder you're so sexually promiscuous, is because you
Oh.
were molested when you were, you know what I mean?
Right. Whereas, like, you might have been sexually promiscuous regardless.
100%.
Yeah, totally.
Totally.
Which I
So
think is a fair, knowing you, you know?
knowing me, I'm a slut. Was, not anymore.
Yeah,
But yeah,
sure.
I had my time.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Which, no maligning of any promiscuity by any means.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
That's a deeply personal choice.
Yeah, whatever you want to do. I mean, I think promiscuity was not great for me because also I was in that validation seeking space, and a lot of the insecurities and deflated sense of self, you know, got me into relationships that I probably never should have been in. I probably should have only been with you. And
Well, you didn't know me at the time.
this is very true.
Also, we have an age gap, so.
You were 8. Yeah, totally.
So
Would've been
you had to
really
wait
awkward.
a while.
Yeah.
You had to wait a while.
Anyway, so
All right, so that is not the point. The point is that, yeah, right. I think when you meet the one, which we'll talk about, was my experience too, of just, I didn't feel that that sentiment that goes around of, oh, I'm so grateful for all these terrible experiences I had because it made me realize
right.
that you were my one. It was more so that I would have recognized you as you are regardless. I think also with the selfless practice, getting out of self, because why I might have not seen you fully would have been because of insecurity about myself, right? That same point that you had made previously about how if I'm looking through this filter of self, I couldn't even receive love. Not really.
Right.
Because I'm thinking it has to be this way or it has to turn out that way. Like if we're taught from a young age that cheese is food and that's the only food that exists, and then we're hungry and we sit at a table and there's grapes and there's strawberries and there's mangoes and there's a giant burrito, but in my mind I only think that there's only one form of food. So I'm sitting there at this feast hungry because I don't realize that these are other forms of food that I can eat that are nutritious and
Yeah, totally.
enjoyable.
Tasty.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And I mean, truthfully, I think I was probably the bad experience for them, you know, more so because, like I was saying, I got in relationships that I should not have been in, didn't know how to not be in them because I thought for a lot of different reasons that I needed to be in those relationships, whether it be the mark of a responsible human being, the mark of a mature man, just the endless pursuit of validation. And then because of not really understanding how to get out of them, promiscuity, cheating, and then guilt, shame, secrecy, feeling like a failure, all that stuff. So that's where I think like promiscuity was rough for me because, you know, I would sell out my integrity for it.
Right. Well, I think what's interesting is that, and you and I have talked about this before, but I just find it interesting that the promiscuity was seen as the issue, when to me, when I look at your story, I see it as you entering into relationships, writing emotional checks that you couldn't cash.
Totally.
Right? That it was more of telling these people, it was more of the dishonesty surrounding
That's
it.
the integrity
right?
piece. Totally.
Where it was this, yes, I'm going to be monogamous with you, I'm going to see you. Or even when you had engaged in open relationships, which all of this is in the book. I mean, as much as humanly possible could be covered because there are things that aren't included in there. But all of the wreckage that was caused by your behavior based on the dishonesty that you were participating in. Yeah. Which I think that when we're coming from that place, from a disempowered place, right, that desperation for validation is so extreme that it does seem to cloud out the rest of what we might want or how we want to be seen.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that sort of double life that starts to happen where it's like, okay, I want the validation over here for being an honorable and, you know, dutiful partner. And then I also want the validation over here of being, the interesting and mysterious.
That is you.
That's you too.
Yeah, totally.
Stage character.
You do
Yeah.
interesting, mysterious real well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome very much.
Yeah, so do you.
Oh, thanks.
So from that perspective, I think that that's the pieces of it, which again, like this was all through self-inquiry that you discovered this, right?
Right. But seeing like the fine lines of everything was a mix between self-inquiry and selfless practice, because I think the more subtle aspects of self were only revealed to me in selfless practice.
Right.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
Because there's a feeling that I get when I'm doing this process with somebody that's very noticeable. There's a certain peace, almost like a joy, a very clean, present feeling. And when I'm out in the world, and like you were kind of mentioning earlier, yeah, I can be kind and loving and open up a door for somebody that walks into a store. But if that little voice in my head comes in, is like, why the fuck didn't you say thank you? You know what I mean? That's no longer that present feeling. So all these like little subtle areas where I just notice expectations, I notice resentments crop up. I notice, putting myself in the view of someone so that I would get validation from them, like these little things that, just kind of help me discern, okay, cool, this is not where it's at for you, Michaelis. You're still in self right now,
Yeah, something you said too reminds me almost of the Foucault panopticon, where we have this.
Damn, she like brings up these words that I just don't know what they mean. Will you please explain to them what that means?
So
God damn it, she's so well read. It's intimidating sometimes. Jesus.
you don't mean that.
I do. No,
You
I don't
mean
totally
that.
mean it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's this idea, put simply, and
Encyclopedia Brown.
I'll be corrected, but put as simply as possible, is being watched constantly being watched. So if self is constantly navigating who or what or how we should be spoken to based on what that represents about us, it's like this thing that's always sort of
Right, vigilance.
Right, this
self-rated.
hypervigilance
Totally.
around it, right? This careful crafting of self. And when something seems to threaten that, which if you're opening up the door and you want to be seen as the person that opens up the door, and someone says to you something, who knows, like it could range from just completely ignoring it, or maybe someone feels offended by that. Like,
Totally.
how dare you open the door for me?
Yeah, do you think I need that? What if I
Right.
seem helpless to you?
Right,
Yeah,
totally. Or perhaps the other way around. Someone opens the door for you, you're like, hey, wait, that's my job.
Right.
I do the door opening.
Totally.
How dare you steal my, spotlight of the door opener, right? When that's happening, I mean, we're not actually present in the moment,
Totally.
right? Versus if you just genuinely feel happy opening the door for someone, well, great. You're happy doing it. So I think finding what it is we really want to feel and then doing the actions where we feel that's how we grow things. And to your point, right, doing the selfless practice where and to be specific, you sat down, read the book with someone across from you. So two people reading this book, getting into the moment, having these conversations, being totally present with one another allowed you to realize, like, oh, when I open the door, I'm present for this.
Totally.
Or when that voice, the watcher of self, comes in and goes, like, has something to say, or ego, or whatever we want to call it, right? We're just calling it self, comes in and has something to say, you're able to tell.
Totally.
Yeah. It sounds louder than maybe it did before.
Yeah, 100%.
Totally.
Yeah. So, I mean, there needs to be like a foundational, truly selfless practice in order to recognize all the nuances of self throughout
Totally.
your life.
Right. And I think it's important that you called it foundational.
Totally.
Right? Because ultimately,
We want to be like this all the time.
right.
Yes, that's the
Right.
goal. But it's practice.
Right.
It's like anything else that you do in life. I mean, if you're like going to the gym or whatever, if you go to the gym once a week and your nutrition's trash, you're never going to have the fit that you want to have, right? But if you're consistent about it, you know, 6 days a week, nutrition's on point, you'll actually get to where you want to go, you know? But spiritual growth seems to be like an ongoing evolutionary for life process, because what's interesting is that we're so inundated with like societal influence to live by self that it takes like serious work, consistent and long term, to sort of undo that and kind of have a different perspective and way that we live our lives. I mean, that's been my experience, at least, you know, because
Totally.
even in like searching for solution out in the world, you'll find so many people just co-signing fear, resentment, jealousy, inadequacy, and it's just like, fuck that, dude. You know, and those voices are loud, especially if they're your homies. It's like, oh,
Right.
you know?
Right. Totally.
Yeah,
And if someone wanted to feel those things, by all means,
totally.
right?
Yeah,
But just knowing that there are other ways. I mean, there'd been times where I was feeling totally okay about something, and then someone came in and go, "You should be upset about this." And it's this moment where it's like, "Well, should I?"
right.
Yeah. Maybe I should be,
Yeah.
you know, or just even getting distance from a situation and then thinking about it. And then it just totally morphs into this other thing.
Dude, that happened to me.
Right.
Like that whole thing with my mom and I trying to kill ourselves together. I mean, I smoked a bunch of meth, so I probably wasn't feeling much of anything. But when I stopped smoking meth, my feelings came back. That was like not even like a thing that I even thought about. It was just like, oh, that happened, because that's kind of how the whole thing was handled, right? And it wasn't until, I don't know, probably,
It was brushed underneath the rug.
yeah, I mean, it was like something like that just happened, you know,
Right.
no big deal. 7 years later, I'm just having a conversation with a therapist, not someone that I was going to therapy for, but just a friend of mine that was a therapist. And her reaction to me telling her the story in such a nonchalant way was like, what?
Right.
That happened? Like fucking crazy, you know?
Right. Which I think can happen too, right? It's like all of that suppression. When she was also concerned, from what I remember from you telling me, is she was also concerned about what in the relationship even led to that moment.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And, you know, what happened? Like, I took that information. I was like, yeah, I should fucking resent her. She did abandon me, you know? And I went in this like whole train of self and carried that for a while, you know? And that was not great for me. So I think this practice is super important because, like you said, it's very individual, and it starts to allow us to open up our minds to a perspective that's not necessarily in line with the status quo. Because
Totally.
if you look out in the world, the status quo sucks a bag of dicks, dude. It's pretty fucking wild out there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, if you focus on that, right?
I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
If
I
you
wrote-
focus on those aspects, I mean, you also talked about this in the book, which is how you were talking about an instance. You were sitting in your backyard in Bali, and you had your phone, and there was all this stuff happening, and there was all this chaos, and the media was showing you all these things, and you were feeling afraid. You were seeing, oh my gosh, this is happening. This is so uncertain. I feel powerless in this moment. Nothing is changing. And what is this world that we're living in?
Right.
And all the fear that came from that. And then you looked up and saw just this nature scene playing out in
like
your
butterflies
backyard.
and shit
Yeah.
flying around and like flowers blooming and stuff. I'm like, what? the
Butterflies and shit.
Seriously.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
When
totally.
it's more poetic in the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, totally. It's
Yeah.
Same idea, you know.
100%.
Put simply, too long didn't read butterflies and shit.
Yeah.
And you have that moment of like, oh wow, the world that I'm currently in, the moment that I'm currently in.
It's perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
Which mirrors what you're saying with your mom, right? First off, by taking that completely, and you're looking at that with this person that exposes it to you of like, hey, this is actually very traumatic, and having those feelings and walking through them. But eventually you get to the other side of it,
If you do.
right? I mean, if you can, right?
Totally.
If you don't stay lost in the maze of it.
Right. But I think a practice is important, you know, because like just continuing to relive your abandonment issues, relive your, whatever stuff that you got going on is a endless venture.
How long have you been doing a selfless practice?
For almost 15 years. But I mean, every single day, and basically reading the book with 1 to 9 people per day. I've been in selfless practice. So consistently.
Yeah. And did you change overnight?
Definitely not. Yeah, definitely not. I mean,
Damn.
yeah, and you'll read about it in the book. It's like, the cool thing is that, yes, I did not change overnight. I still had a lot of unmanageability and feelings and, stuff going on in my life, but there was hope. And for the first time in my life, there was a specific action that I could do that would relieve me in that moment, right? Like I knew that there was something that I could do.
You had a way out in that moment.
Yeah, because like there's times in my life before where, the shit's hitting the fan or whatever, and then maybe magically I would feel at peace, but I couldn't, it was not my doing. It was just like, whatever, it was a feeling. But to actually have a practice that, yielded that I could go to, that was so simple. Sitting across from somebody with a book and reading with them and having a conversation, like there's nothing simpler than that. So that was really cool. And then like over time, the parts of myself that like plagued me were just the symptoms of self, right? And being in a selfless practice consistently over time just kind of slowly removed some of that stuff, where I actually started healing not only the stuff internally, but how I treated the world around me too.
Yeah, so you're not creating further wreckage.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, and I'll let you answer this, but selfless practice, how did it help the places where there was a choice, like beliefs, weaponizing that part, and then the places where it wasn't a choice and you were affected by something that you couldn't control? Did selfless practice help with both?
Selfless practice help with both, but oh, it sounds like that ASMR. Anyway, we're not gonna do that. But yeah, I mean, check it out. The cool thing about this book is that it also comes with spiritual concepts. So there's almost like the selfless practice, but also the I don't want to call it brainwashing, but
Don't call it that.
I know, almost like the replacement of ideas and the replacement of like thinking that,
Breaking down belief systems that no longer serve you.
yeah, totally. So, reading these concepts in the book over time and repetitively, you wind up breaking down concepts and belief systems that weren't serving me.
Well, really, it's not the concepts that are being introduced; it's the practice.
I think it's
It's
both.
the questioning.
You
Yeah,
know?
it's the questioning. I mean, the concepts of finding out for yourself,
Totally.
right? That self-knowledge isn't enough, right? The understanding of how certain beliefs have plagued you, but even those beliefs are things that people are going to figure out for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. So it's not like you have to adopt these things, but I think also just the interaction with another human being and seeing that, again, like we talked about before, like we're not really unique. We're not any more damaged than anybody else. Our life experiences aren't necessarily that much more traumatic than other people. Everyone's had some weird shit going on in their life and their family, someone they're associated with. So it's not foreign.
Right. Well, it's also connecting people to their own personal freedom and their
Totally.
understanding of that. Yeah. And then you mentioned how the connection with another person, the sharing deeply and intimately with someone else, is what freed you of the shame and the guilt of some of your behavior or just things that had happened without your control.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.